The power of water in the urban environment. I call this lecture, since it is your topic, on water. That is now for this week. One of the interesting items is that we are always fascinated with water, and water is sometimes our source of life, and sometimes it is terrifying us. There was a movie, The Flood, in London, where movie makers were inventing how it would be if there would be a real big flood on London. And the nice thing is that it doesn't happen, but the bad thing on this is that actually there are that many floods that sometimes reality is more harsh than the movie. And current flooding of European cities and outside the European areas, we've seen that causes many lives, many goods are and properties are destroyed. So this is really an issue. And of course, if you think about nature, nature always pushes back. If a volcano has been erupted, at one moment this spark of green starts to grow again. This is on the Galapagos Islands, so, but anywhere this will happen. When we think about nature, of course, today we are threatened by rivers that are expanding in our cities during flash floods, and we need to protect our cities at sea. But in long history, people were more adapted to the water. This is a picture from Nazca, Peru. And imagine that if you would walk this spiral, you come to fresh water. And the fresh water is coming from the hills, and you can see them hardly when you're there, even though it is good weather, but it's from the Andes Mountains, which is about 100 to 300 kilometers away. From a far distance, they were able to bring the water to the areas where they wanted to have agriculture. And in our cities, for instance, always in history, the balance was there between homes, farms, and the lower land and the higher lands to create a complete circular system. But somehow in history, we lost this, of course. During Middle Ages, at one moment, rivers became sewers and water was spreading diseases. Although there are still these moments that we still capture the water. This is in Istanbul, one of the basins where they have captured water. So you see that people were always fascinated in this system. Today we have lost in many cities the connection to water, and there are some extraordinary examples where river restoration took place. This is the Cheonggyechong River in Seoul. I hardly can pronounce this, so most likely I pronounced it wrong, but this was a highway, in fact. And here you see an opening image of when the river project was realized. So they turned a highway back into a river. And of course, this is an act of bringing back nature in the city and also restoring the old water system that once was there. And on another note, we see that sometimes river systems have been changed. This is the river park, and there's no river anymore because this was initially the river in Valencia. But since it has caused many floods and there were many problems with the water management, the city decided to lead the river outside the city and turned the river into a park. Still, you can imagine that that if you would bring the water from the city, within the city, to this park, that at least it would infiltrate and regenerate the planting, which is now a lush area. On the other hand, they need to think about how the river diverted from its original position can still have the right function and right position in the landscape. So yes, cities, as it was already mentioned by Gaia, cities can be sponges, and if the water system works well, you could say that we have the possibility to take the water on board, to bring it into the sponge, and at one moment when we need the water, to squeeze it out and have it ready for planting and for our users in the city. I'm showing you now some urban projects within the city. And there are several types of projects, of course. It's not as big as the river in Seoul, but let's say on the network, there's a big impact. The first one is in Apeldoorn, the Netherlands. And actually, this city is having a canal, which is the large blue line that you find in the middle of the picture. And it is at the east of a hilly landscape in the Netherlands. There's not many hills, don't expect anything serious. In Italy, I think in every village you have a higher hill than here in the Netherlands, but still the water runs always from the highest point to the lowest point. So even in the Netherlands, you have these effects. And during history, people were taking the water and digging small, what we call griften. So it is a small, really tiny canal. And sometimes there were brooks that were connected to let's say, the lower lands and the marshlands. And once that the canal was digged in the 19th century, these were connected to the canal to bring the water a bit further. The project area you will find in black. But what is important is actually that the city is already for about 25 years working on restoration of this small brook system. And we advised them in this to bring water from, again, within the city, to disconnect and urban areas from the sewer and bring clean water at least to these brooks, and then have the sewer only available for black water. Once that we zoom into this small area, the original situation was that there was a parking lot, and the parking lot was completely taking this place, and the brook was not present anymore. It was just in a tube underground. So the one thing we first did was that, so that's the top image at the left. And then we first thought, okay, what we need to do is bring the brook back in space, because it is valuable water. And so we brought it back. That means that, of course, you have to do something, because if either you have to remove the parking, or you have to decide that then the parking will be underground, which is, let's say, in an underground parking garage, you can realize this. Of course, it was easier said than done, but people accepted that at least we should invest in an underground parking garage. And then we said, well, then we also want to make this small inclined landscape on top of this parking garage, that at least that you look at the area that that's a park, and not that it looks like something transformed as still a parking lot. So the design was made, and we said, well, it was an artificial brook, so it's not, let's say, a complete river system, but we want to give this area the notion being a green entrance to the city center, and also provide the right water qualities. So the homes, let's say the pipes from the roofs were disconnected from the sewer, and this water was brought via underground passages. So these underground passages are already filtering, because it's soil, it was filtering the water. So clean water was added to this brook, and we made also the brook in a way. We put some stones in it to make at least it have the right speed of streaming, that it was good for ecology. So you don't see, sometimes you don't see ecology, because it's just small animals and fish within the brook, but it has its value. So we said, well, let's maximize the softscape. So if we bring it back, then of course, if it's a park, we need to have path. But it would be just better to see only a path along the water and not just everywhere. So we made the path, we made it slightly hilly, and then we carved the path more or less in this landscape. So if you look from this perspective, you hardly see where the east-west paths are. And then here you see the brook, and that is revitalized. In fact, you could even drink from it, but yeah, to tell that to people, that is, of course, you better not do it, because if children would drink from it and they would eat something would be wrong with the food in the evening, and then they should have troubles with digestion. People would never blame it on the food, but they would say, oh, you've been drinking from the brook, so you better not do it. But in fact, you could. The water is that pure that you can drink from it, and even though it's urban water. And this is the image, how you can see it. That's the green connection to the city. Apologies, here there's something went wrong with the translation from the PowerPoint to PDF, but here there should be, the word should be Mechelen, but it has disappeared. Mechelen actually was part of the WHICC program. That sounds very complicated, but it was a European program where several smaller European cities were connecting their forces and intending on bringing back canals. So it is not the river, but in this fact, it is a canal. And Mechelen really had a lot of canals in the past, because it was a kind of delta environment, and the city really adapted in history to that delta environment. But many have been covered. So this was one of the projects that we did at an early stage. And well, we said we need to bring back the canal, but we also need to adapt to the urban layers that have been put there in history. It means that it was a parking lot. It has already transformed into a parking lot. And we said, well, first we need to organize traffic. Then we need to make a higher area where the traffic still in let's say, a more shared space area can be accommodated, and green will be planted. Then we'll make some new bridges, we'll restore some old ones, but some new we need to make, because sometimes already in history, people have made front doors to this parking place, but of course, when there was water, there was no front door. So if you bring back the water, you have to accommodate the front doors again. We bring back the water, of course, and we said, well, we need also to bring in light. The first studies was just with a simple model to show how it could work. That you organized, let's say, in still some through traffic, you organize a walkway along the water and the water. This is the plan. So gradually we got more into it, and we found out how we could do it with all the restraints, because it's working in a very urban environment. So it's never easy to change the area back. You have to bring a new layer, because it's not about reinventing history, but it is adding to today and tomorrow. And here, one of the pictures of the project realized. This is the old bridge. And that you see here, the water is now again running. You see also at the very right of the picture that there was already a new passage that was made later in history. And of course, if we would not do anything, people would fall into the water. So we made a kind of very modern boardwalk. It's also the kind of design intervention where you play with the time layers. So the old bridge was, let's say, conceived as being a historic bridge, and the new layers are very modern. And here you see the edge of the water, where people can walk, and one of the new bridges. Again, the let's say the pavement of the pedestrian area, and the other area. And during night, we said, well, light can bring in this area alive. Since it was also a parking area at one moment, there are many backspaces. So bringing back light makes also this area more comfortable for people who walk there during the evening. And already in Northern Europe, it can be, let's say, already evening at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a winter's day, because it is already dark at that moment. This is one of the later extensions in another area where we expanded the river and said, well, we're going to make again some canals, bring it back to the surface and link it to, let's say, the urban tissue that has already changed over time. Now we move to Denmark, also a very urban project. One of the issues there was that there was a river in the town, not a big river, but regularly floods take place. And then they put just some sandbags and said, okay, we're there. And we said, well, what you need to do at least is to make sure that you change your area into a lower area and a higher area. And the second item was that it was a dance theater created, but the northern part and the southern part of the city center were not really connected. So we said, well, maybe also if you respect the water more. It was not bringing back the water, but at least respecting here and respecting the fact that it could also cause floods. To make the lower area that there is some expansion of the area where it's safe, and at the higher area you create safe grounds and you create a bridge. So then the whole scenery more or less becomes a stage. At the southern part of the dance theater, there was a parking lot. Again, parking lots. People really like parking lots at some time. But nowadays, we said, well, you really need to reorganize parking. So in this case, we reduced the parking to the very southern area. And then there was at least space for outdoor events. And in this case, it is also about water as a pleasure. So the outdoor area at the south, we said we make a small water basin, which can capture the light sometimes. And if, for instance, if there's a big event, you even can switch it off, and then you have this whole space available for people who can have a party there or have a theater there. The steps are, let's say, almost like the amphitheater. At the northern area, there we created the lower area, and always created at some places areas where you could connect. So the wooden steps are going into the water, so people can even use it as a podium. So if there's a small event or something that takes place, it works almost like a theater. And since it was a dance theater, we also wanted to have this function outside, so you can play with it. It's not just only saying we capture the water, we do all these items that are really important for climate adaptation, but we also want to make it a scenery for people. And now I want, yeah, another picture. The bridge is folded in a way that the bridge also becomes part of, let's say, the area, the amphitheater, so people even can sit on the bridge if you would take the time. And here you see how the lower area has planters and gradually the ramps to the higher areas. And since the water not always has the same level and the steps are continuous, there's always a possibility to be really close at the water. So it also has something to do with perception. So water is not always a threat, but you also want to make sure that people can enjoy the water. So here the steps are going into the water. Then we move to London, Meridian Water. On the larger scale, this type of interventions, you can categorize them. So for Meridian Water in London, we were looking at a brownfield along the River Lee, which is, let's say, a river that runs up from north to the River Thames. River Thames is the most known, of course, in London, but there are several smaller rivers that bring water to the River Thames. The basins are here for drinking water. And one of the facts that we need to face is that already when a city is that large as London, that it has a problem with drinking water and supplying enough drinking water for people. So water is also a precious good. And that say in a country where we think that it always rains. The brownfield area called Meridian Water will be transformed into an urban area, 10,000 homes, it's 85 hectares. Since the city is installing Crossrail 2, that is a metro system, a high-speed metro system that's, let's say, a little bit slower than the train system, but faster than the contemporary metro system. That makes that this area that is, let's say, north of London, will be situated after realization within 15 minutes from the city center. So the perspective of where you are in the city changes because of this Crossrail 2 connection. On the other hand, there is the old area. This is at the right. This is at the right of the location. Here you see the location in orange. Below you see the River Thames, and it's the River Lee that runs from north to south. At the west of this area, there is Edmonton, and we also made plans for, let's say, another 85 hectares, which is existing city. So to compensate for let's say, for improvements in public realm for the people that actually live in the adjacent area, not to forget them. In the master plan, we said, well, think about all type of water interventions. We said we are familiar with water, but we need to categorize them in 4 categories. The first category is actually to prevent the area from flooding from upstreams. There are 2 brooks, the Salmons Brook and the Pim's Brook, and they bring water, and also the River Lee brings water. And then once that, let's say, there is a large amount of rain, of flash floods, the area can be inundated. So let's say the first category is the protection category. And you can do that via dikes. You can do it via inclinations in space. So there are all types of instruments, and we all made an icon for each instrument. And we also labeled them in terms of, will it be easy to realize, what will be the cost. So in fact, every icon corresponds to a page of a document. And the document was, of course, also provided to the government. Then the second category is, can we capture the water in this area to make sure that if we build this area with a new urban environment, that we don't cause in this area let's say the inundations in below stream. So since every act that you do has an effect on the people that are further on the stream. So that means that you can do infiltration, or you can put it in water basins, or you can have wadis. So there are also kind of instruments, and not all are linked to every area. So one of the areas is really polluted. So their infiltration is not, normally it's the best way to capture water in an area. But if you have already an area where there's soil pollution, then even if you remediate it, you have the problem that there might be something still. And if you let it infiltrate, you might have polluted water in the below areas of the soil and rocks, and then gradually it affects your drinking water. So there you have to take other tools. So to have a toolbox with this category where you capture the water, but in every sub area of this area, this development, you need to take different tools, to apply different tools to make it work. And then the third category is to filter the water, to make it cleaner, to make it better for use. And the fourth category we added, it's not has nothing to do with water safety, but it is water education and pleasure. So we bring back it as visible as possible. You have seen it already in the Danish project and the Mechelen project and the AUDe project. We also try to make it as an urban space. So water as a pleasure for people is also an important issue, even though it's not the protection directly, of course. Here you see some of these tools. So you see a new canal and another new canal. You see the urban development in between. You see green roofs. You see green inner courts, green along the courtyards. So we try to capture the water within the block, bring it back as slowly as possible to the urban public realm, and then gradually store it, of course, in vegetation buffers. We raise floors, so make sure that also the floor level of the building is not really affected. And let's say in the more natural area along the River Lee, we use also this parkland for water retention. So at the right bottom you see there the natural area, and we slowly slope it also with some inclination. So if there's sometimes a little bit more water, we capture it, and it gets to get these situations where you actually have for some longer time water, and you have different gradients that increases biodiversity. And here another series of these sections and tools. And you see in every urban situation, you can apply different tools. And the different tools are linked to this, as explained, this book of the toolkit. Then in the first phase, we said for Meridian Angel, there should be 1,000 homes, but not built immediately. So this will start with half. Then we said, well, okay, also in this area, you can already start thinking green. So if you're not building up everything, so maybe you could make here your nursery for planting. That makes sure that if you plant trees in the urban environment, in the public realm, that at least they've been raised in this area. So you have already the advantage of getting larger trees for the price of a smaller tree. You also have already an area that becomes more attractive than if it's just wasteland land. So the nursery is also a quality for public space. We also said, well, you can do some urban farming here. So in the meantime, and of course, at one moment it will vanish because gradually you build up the area, but it can also move to the next phase. Here on the larger scale, you see that also there's a kind of link to the tools. If you look at the smaller area, this is along a brook, this is how it can work. That you say, okay, the brook, it had all hard edges, so we change the hard edge into soft edge. We make a gradient at one area, but there's a lot of space. And then we say we can make a gradient, and gradually the river can expand if there's a lot of water. The brook can expand with a lot of water, but at one moment, once that you need the water for the planting, we also make sure that it can infiltrate, so it's all soft landscape. We make the green banks in a way that is softly sloping, so you also get this gradient, which is interesting for diverse plants, and also make sure that the water itself is pure and purified, so that it's also worth for ecology. This is another diagram of one of the parks there we capture water and bring it back via, it's a park which is more in the urban environment up north. So there we are not linked to the brook itself. We capture the water, create a water pond. We make sure that here also the water is celebrated in a small park, that there's some infiltration, and at one moment we bring it back into a small canal, and that canal is leading to the brook. And on primary roads we also expand our system that it connects the water. For the adjacent area, which is actually a very densely populated area, and where even more people nowadays live, because some of these homes, they're quite big, and they are changed over time to 8 apartments instead of just one home. So there's a lot of parking places in the area. The public space is asphalted. Sometimes even the front gardens were completely asphalt or concrete. So we said, well, if you want to change this also 85 hectare and you don't know which area you can start first and you have a limited budget, you should have a strategy. And strategy was, let's bring in rain gardens and let's bring in tree planting. So we said just plant as much trees as possible. And most of the time we start thinking about a realistic number that could be achieved. It's also putting some pressure on the officials to really realize it. Once that we are gone, it's really funny, but in many places I've heard that the number stays. 1 month ago, I had a talk with one of the city officials in Rotterdam. He said, oh yeah, once that you had this vision for Rotterdam city center, you said that we should plant 1,000 trees. You're a really nice guy, he said. Yeah, now I'm at 950, but it's really hard. So he was also, at 7 years later, he was only at 950, but he's still trying to get this number of 1,000 in. And I liked it very much because, of course, he had this problem by realizing this, but since he was an official of the city, he's still working there. So he needs to do this. But the nice thing is that we get these trees in. And here you see the public-private intervention. So even in this water story, we try to create green roofs at some places, try to create green corner gardens, and include also the private area. So for the private area, we have tried to make some people enthusiastic, because the city, of course, cannot do that much. It is private land. And for the corner gardens, it's city's land. So we said that's really important to start at the corners and make these green, because that also is very important for the image of the street. Nowadays, it is a street with only cars parked at both sides. If you just plant some trees at the corners and create a green corner garden, then already at the entrance of the street, you see green instead of parked cars. So it's not the number of parked cars that you change that much, but it's changing them at a strategic position. And here you see one of the images, how it works. So we said, well, we create what we call a wadi that is suitable for water infiltration. We create parking places where at least water can infiltrate. We planted some trees, not only at the corners, but also some in the middle. So to have this perspective of that, at least with a few trees, we already changed the perspective of the street. And the strategy is also that it can expand. So in streets where you can reduce parking a little bit more, then you already plant some more trees, and you can even change it over time. You don't need to do it all at once. The last project I would like to show you is Athens. We are now moving to a southern European city. So many of these examples were northern cities. And of course, you can say, well, in the northern, you have a lot of water. So there, that's fairly easy to capture the water, to make it infiltrate and make it work. You might have a bit more problem with flooding, but in the southern, it's different. The bad news is that, of course, it's a bit different, but it's not that different. In the southern cities, European cities, there's also a lot of flash floods. And ones that I told the people from Athens, the strategy to capture water during winter and make it available for the summer, said, oh, we don't have that much water in winter, so it doesn't work. But already 2 weeks later, after my first presentation, there was a really big flash flood, and cars were actually floating in the city. So it happens, it happens. The project is about 56 hectares of new city center. our existing city center, but new transformation. That's how I should say it. It was called Rethink Athens. So it was thinking about how the city can change. And imagine the main corridor, the corridor that is, let's say, the dotted line in the middle of this picture from, let's say, northwest to southeast. That is Panepistimiou, and it is 6 lanes of cars, 6 lanes of cars in the city center. Of course, in Rome, there are some big traffic arteries, although now there's also a policy for change. In Milano, you have some big arteries, and they are already under change. But this is even more, and it is really close in the city center. So we said, as a first approach, that first in the city you should create a coherent green network. There is already a large green areas, but they're not really connected to the daily environment of living environment of people. And you should link also these areas to each other. Then at least you get ecological value. You get also a value of, let's say, green corridors in the city. Meanwhile, we were thinking about heat mitigation, and what you see is here the tools for heat mitigation. We also try to approach it in a systematic way. So there are tools, the green tools are linked to tree planting and all kind of green elements. The blue ones are linked to water in the city, and the other color, which is, let's say, fairly vague orange or pink in between, that is linked to hardscape. Of course, if you want to do something on heat mitigation, tree planting is crucial. A tree makes 7 degrees temperature reduction on a hot summer day at this very spot of the tree. Water, just 1 degree. So that is quite a big difference. To plant trees and to make these green structures, you need to change mobility. So we said, well, first we're going to change movement to make space for green. So it's not just that we dislike cars. Everyone can drive in a car. But mobility should be rearranged. So at one moment you should realize that you should leave your car and take the public transport or take cycle. So if you get more adapted mobility, so thinking on where do I need to be and what time can I be there and what is actually the accessibility available, then you can actually change public space because you don't need that much cars. And if you think about what is actually the space that cars takes, let's say in one car, if you take that 12 square meters that a car takes, many pedestrians can stand there. So a car with one person or many pedestrians. So we said, well, we need to change it. We should start thinking from the pedestrian, because in the end, we're all pedestrians. Even if you come by car and park your car in a parking garage, at the end, to your final destination, you're a pedestrian. So the pedestrian, we put it in focus. So the change of 2012 to 2016. At that time, we hoped that we would be at 2016, but the project is, of course, delayed. Is immense. Then once that you have changed this, you can say we can create a green network, and green network will be planting trees and making areas more soft. This is a picture of OKRA in the middle of Panepistimiou and viewing on OKRA. The true capacity of trees is that the 7 degrees you get at this very spot of the trees. But if you design it cleverly, you can achieve a 1.5 to 3 degrees on every single piece of this whole area, even if there's no tree yet, because in the end the tree is actually creating micro winds. So because the tree leaves evaporate, these micro winds create a little effect of cooling. It also makes that there's not only the real temperature reduction, but there's also the index for how you feel. So if the reflection is less of this heat, during a hot summer day, it also has a big quality for people's perception of heat. Meanwhile, we said, well, you also, apart from shadow, you can create more diversity and you can create seasonal effects. So with this planting, you can also contribute to biodiversity. The blue network in this case is not a network of rivers and streams. They are in this case already some rivers somewhere in the city, but mostly already covered and hardly to reveal. But we said, well, what you can do is we can capture the water from the hills and store it into crates, underground crates, and make a connected system of this. So that's actually the blue network. Here you see how it works. And initially we were close to 11,000 cubic meters, but then I spoke to one of the professors, and he almost got tears in the eyes. He said, if we can get this for Athens, it would be really great. But he said, could you just ensure that it will be self-sufficient? So capture as much water that the plants need. And then we try to enlarge even the system a little bit more. This is about more than 20 Olympic swimming pools. So it is a huge system, but it's done just if in a linear way. So that's how you can bring it underground. And here you see how more or less it works. During winter, there is some rain. There's a wet period. It's not that wet as, of course, in Northern Europe. So then the system has its dimension that on April, every crate will be full. And then gradually during summer months, you take the water from that system for the planting. The trees can evaporate, and then at the end of the dry period, then gradually when it's starting rain, then hopefully you are about that your crates are just not empty, and then the system starts to fill again. That's how it's been thought. Meanwhile, we also said, well, apart from that, there will also be the activation of public space. We're not just making only this nice boulevard for shared space, a tramway, cycling and walking and taxis, but we also need to think about how the mobility system works and how we can activate. That's why we created also the theater of 1,000 rooms. It was an invention, it's just a word, but I found out that during classic history, in Greece, a theater was a social important feature. So people not just only went to theater, but afterwards they met people and they went for a small drink or something to eat. So it is not just only the theater, but the whole social aspect of it. And the theater was accessible for everyone. So people with lower incomes paid less than people with higher incomes. This whole social notion of the theater makes that at one moment you can actually design with it. So I said, well, let's make the theater 1,000 rooms. There is in Athens a lot of vacancies. At Omonia, there's up till 80% of the buildings are vacant. That is really a problem. The public space is dangerous. Some places are places where people don't dare to come. That's how the city center has been degraded. So the problem is much more than in many other European cities. So this whole social activation of, let's say, public space and the building is necessary to gain again confidence in the city center, that at least people in the end will go there and let's say that vacant buildings will be filled up with small enterprises and with homes for people. This theater of 1,000 rooms, of course, it is just an idea. But at one moment, I saw that our client already captured the idea because Rex were renovating and 3 theaters were created. So Mr. Papadimitriou said, "Wow, Martin, 3 for Rex here, 997 to go." And this joke, of course, was a reality, but also the fact that he understood that the mechanism could work. So during the presentation of the project at the end, when we had made definitive design, It was presented in the Stoa, close to one of the squares, and then these shops were filled temporarily. So the Onassis Foundation, our client, they were filling all these empty, vacant areas, and suddenly one of the areas was vibrant. Of course, it was a short-term project, but at least you could see that it could work. And then we are thinking as well on how to create public space and also how to do this sometimes in open space of buildings. Oh, I see something wrong. We're almost there, but now get to the last pictures. Yeah, one of the big things was to connect spaces and places, and I think that's how, let's say, not only this biodiversity and water story works, but it works for people. I think here in the inner city. Unfortunately, it's not realized yet. The government was at that moment at its end terms and didn't get the European funding. But there are talks ongoing, so we hope that in the near future we will complete an amended plan and then at one moment change Athens. What is the storytelling? Of course, the story, I think, on the urban water interventions is thinking how can we live in the city and how can we accommodate our spaces into, let's say, more attractive spaces? How can we make them more healthy for people? How can we enhance our daily quality of daily life? And I hope our lecture or my lecture will bring some inspiration for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Martin. It's very, very interesting. And I noticed that there are some questions that in a moment I will read from the chat. I just have first a question for you. That is that one. I am in the Department of Architecture and Civil Engineer, and all the time when I speak with engineers, they say, okay, biodiversity, but what does it mean? Okay, you raise the temperature, but how many degrees and so on. So my question is, what do you learn from your projects? I mean, every project is an experiment. I mean, probably you work for biodiversity, but you want to attract birds and instead you have frogs. Or, for example, in vertical forest in Milan, they notice more birds than what they expected. So in the morning at 5 o'clock, the birds shout, of course. And so this was an unexpected thing. So I ask you, what are the results? What are the unexpected things? And what do you learn from your practice? Because this is still a sort of experimental field in which we are moving.
Yes, I agree with you that it's an experimental field. For Athens, there was a calculation on NVMet. So the Greeks wanted to have proof on the estimated quality on temperature reduction. So that was part of the project. So first we worked together with Wageningen University, who provided, let's say, some tools. And then later we worked together with Werner Sobak, a German firm, who used NVMet. So they made a model and then put all the facts of today in the model and scientifically calculated. So that already gave a little bit, let's say, the engineering proof. But then, as you say, there is also at one moment, especially for biodiversity, you cannot calculate biodiversity in advance. So there's, let's say, the experiment ongoing. Let's say in the Apeldoorn example, after the restoration of the Brook, they found a small animal which is called baked brick. It's only this size, so it is really small, but it's an indicator species of water quality. And they found that it was there. So for the ecologists, that was really an important item. For the audience, there was what is called in Dutch ijsvogel, which is, let's say, a bird that also likes a lot of clean water. And it was seen there. So that one got in the newspaper. So let's say the ecological proof was not really, well, that was good for the professionals. And let's say the bird, that went really well for, let's say, the audience. Sometimes it even can go wrong. I was giving a lecture in Nijmegen, in the east of the Netherlands, and there we've done 20 years ago a project. And then we turned a military area, which was asphalted, into a park. And one area that was a bit more ecological and close to the forest, we planted a bit more trees around it, and we said, okay, then that area will be a bit more sheltered. But then there was a drama taking place. Ecology was pushing back because at one moment there was a wild pig coming from the forest into this park because he liked it. But people were, of course, this big wild pig, people were a bit upset. So in the end, it was shot. So there was a drama because, let's say, then we had nature and we had real nature, not just, let's say, the animals that you and I would like, but real nature. And then people were upset that it was too much a success. So I had to give this lecture with the wild animal because they brought it to somebody who prepared it in front of me at the podium. I hope that we also find the balance between accepting then what nature will be, because yes, as you say, there are unexpected things.
Okay, just read a question on the chat that from Mariana Pereira Guimarães. You say that the quality of water, you can read it too. The quality of water in the Amalia Park is very good. I'm curious to know more how you achieve it, and also your thought on changing people's mentality and prejudice when it comes approaching water. Okay.
Yeah, I must say that we try to safeguard water quality. Most of the times here in the Netherlands, that is the responsibility of water boards. So luckily we have a board that is concerned with water quality, so they measure, etc. But then still you need also to communicate. So let's say the newspaper items are helping us a bit, because then people are aware that you should not throw things in the water, or at least you should not pollute in the vicinity. It's about changing mentality, yes, as I read in the chat. I completely can agree. Yeah.